So this is kind of a potpourri day. We're going to talk about interviewing. We're going to talk about two different kinds of interviews, and then that question about what do you do if people just won't hire you because you're overqualified. And we hear that from folks all the time. And we'll talk about your answers. So the two kinds of interviews we're going to talk about are phone interviews and Skype interviews. More and more people are getting Skype interviews, and just how do you wrangle those? How do you optimize your success in a screening interview by telephone? The phone interview, there are two kinds. There are the phone interviews that are scheduled. Leave us this block of time. We're going to be calling you. We're going to have a conference call, or we're going to be calling you to ask you questions about this job. It will be on this day between these hours. That's the kind that we all hope to get. The other one is surprise. All right. So, yeah, that was me. I had a surprise one time. Years ago, it happened at about 6:30. I'm cooking dinner, and this guy calls up, and he said, this is so-and-so from the ABC company. Do you have a minute? Everybody's got a minute. I said, sure, I got a minute. And he said, great, I just have a few questions that I need to ask you. What were the last 3 job-related books that you read? And I'm like, oh, my God. I'm watching my potatoes boil over thinking, what was the name of that red one? I was so not in that mode of answering interview questions, and especially not stupid interview questions. And so I didn't realize at the time I was considerably younger and not very experienced in all of that. It never occurred to me that I could say, I'm sorry, this is not a good time. Let me call you back tomorrow during business hours. It never occurred to me that I had that power. But you always can do that. And at the very beginning, when he said, do you have a minute? I should have asked, well, what is this in reference to? I should have gotten a little bit more information. And then I could have said, oh, a screening interview, I'm sorry, this is not a good time for that. You never want to sort of paint a picture of you being too domestic. It's not like, no, I'm sorry, I'm changing the baby. Because then it's like they begin to quit picturing you as a professional. But sure, and even after he asked that question, I still had the power. I could have said, oh, I'm sorry, this sounds like an interview, and I'm afraid this isn't a good time for that. When could I call you back? And I should have absolutely done that. So at any rate, the surprise one, you do have the power to say, I'm sorry, I'm just out the door, I'm just going out the door for a meeting. When would be a good time for me to call you right back? Obviously, nobody can talk on the phone in your car anymore unless you got Bluetooth or something, since it's a hands-off state now, or city. And so you can always say, I'm sorry, I'm driving, I can't talk, or whatever, or just not answer it at all. So the unscheduled ones should not take you too much by surprise. If they say, this is all the time we have, and then just say, well, just a minute. Let me just go to another room, and then breathe deeply. If you have records or anything like that you can get out so that you're not caught totally by surprise, try to get organized, and then just focus, concentrate, pray, and then say, okay, I'm ready now. What are your questions? Story and call back. Oh, that's when you give them a story and say, when can I call you back? So you give them some kind of a thing, whether it's totally true or not. I'm sorry, I just got out of the shower. Let me call you right back, or something like that. And then you scramble to prepare, and then you suck it up and do your best. So it's the 3 S's, essentially, when you get a surprise, and that's easy to remember. When you have a scheduled interview, you're going to plan ahead and absolutely study that job description. Most screening interviews go straight down the job description. Once in a while, it will be like a real interview where they ask you ridiculous questions like your strengths and your weaknesses and all of that, but usually it is a screening interview. They don't want to waste the time of a hiring manager by setting up an interview with somebody who is not qualified. And so they're going to go straight down the requirements of the job description, and that explosion of the job description, that is good advice for everybody. If the job description is well written, it tells you exactly what they're looking for. The ideal candidate will be this. So have examples of the work that you've done, stories that you can throw in about successes that you've had, and have them all related to that job. And again, use the keywords from the job description whenever you can. Make sure that you also have done a little bit of research on salary, because quite often in the screening interview they touch on salary. They don't want to schedule an interview with somebody and then have your salary expectations be totally out of line with what the job is going to pay. So be prepared for that question. Before we get started, what kind of money are you hoping to get? In the salary negotiation class that we have down the street, we do give you a little bit of a script that you can pull out in case of that question. The first approach that you want to give when they say what kind of money are you hoping to get is just try to postpone that. You know, there's no way I can answer that at this point. I don't really have enough information about that job. If we could postpone that question, I would appreciate it. We have had a speaker here several times. Charles Black used to be the lead recruiter at Dell, and he is a contract recruiter. He's very successful, fabulous presenter. He is, it almost doesn't matter what his topic is. He has a message that he inserts into every presentation he makes, and it has to do with salary, and it's like, never tell them a number. Never tell them what you made in the past. Never tell them what you're looking for in the future. And he's adamant about, and he will not give it. He'll walk away from a job rather than give them that information. And he says if they want you, if you're qualified for that, they'll come get you. I've talked to so many recruiters, however, who say, you know, my job is not to schedule an appointment until I know that you're close. And it's something that I'm evaluated on. I have to get that information. I'm not allowed to schedule you unless I have that. So I'm going to talk from the other side of the desk a little bit. I think it's a fair question for people to ask. Again, if they really want you and you haven't given that up, they may still schedule you. But I'm going to talk to you about how do you give them a number. But the first approach is the same always. There's no way I could answer that question because I don't know enough about the job. So then the screening interview ensues. You're asking them questions. You want to make sure this is a good fit for you, and they're asking you questions from the job description. And then eventually they'll say, okay, now you know everything we know. What kind of money are you looking for? See if you can throw it back on them. I'm sure you have an amount budgeted for this position. What is your budgeted amount? And very often a recruiter or someone will tell you, well, we pay somewhere in the 60 to 70,000 range or whatever. They very well might give you a range. And so if that range is close enough, then you want to say, okay. If it's low, you might want to say, well, that was lower than I had anticipated, but I'm very interested in the position. I look at a lot of other things besides just the salary. I would like to move forward in the process. You still have not given them a number. You've sort of said what you have in mind is okay. And sometimes a really good compensation package is enough to offset a slightly lower salary. Again, depending on where you are in your career, you might be totally okay with taking a bit of a step back on the salary ladder in order to get an opportunity that you've been looking for a long time. So at any rate, see if they'll give you a range. Now, if they won't give you a range, they say, no, you tell us. And it's sort of, you're stopped at that point. One of the ways that you can answer that is you can say, well, based on my research, and you don't have to tell them where you researched, based on my research, the normal range for this position is 70 to 80. So you might have just bumped it up a little bit. And they might say, well, your low is sort of our high. We're relatively close. You know, I really don't want money to get in the way of this. If you think that I'm the best person for this job, this is an industry I've always been interested in. This is a company I've always admired. I don't think we're going to have a problem coming up with some kind of an arrangement that's going to be good for all of us. I would like to move forward in the process. And you want to stay moving forward unless you're so far apart on money that it would be a waste of your time anyway. You know, so understand what you're going to have in order to survive, and what you're willing to settle for. Gordon?
It's the other way, though. What if you don't know, and then you lowball yourself, and they go, wow, man, you're leaving, you know,
well, when you say, so the question was, what if you lowball yourself? What if you don't give them a figure? They say, no, you have to tell us. And you can say, you know, the job that I did before is very similar to this. This has some new challenges, some new opportunities. I don't want to lock myself into a specific range. I believe that I have the skills you're looking for, and I'd like to learn more about the job. I'd like to move forward, but I'm quite sure that we're going to be able to come up with something that's going to be good for both of us. And don't give a range. And they'll probably, if you kind of couch it in those terms, they'll probably be okay. Try to not give the specifics as long as you possibly can. And we have an HR person who would like to weigh in on this.
Well, I was going to ask, because I know that a lot of job postings, as you're submitting your application, they're asking you.
Right.
And it's a required field.
Okay.
You have to put something in there. So I'm wondering, if I put what I really want, am I cutting myself at the feet, or if I go lowball and then when I have the interview,
Okay. So Christina has asked the $64,000 question, which we all struggle with. When you fill out an online application and they say, what kind of money do you hope to get? And it is a required field. You have to put something in. If you lowball yourself, will they take advantage of that? If you put something too high, will you put yourself out of consideration? I advise you to do a great deal of research through salary.com, through talking to people through LinkedIn who have had that job before, through Glassdoor.com. Very often salary information is provided on Glassdoor, and get as much information as you possibly can. And then one way to keep going through the process is, once you have found a range, once you have found as much information as you can, if you have to put something in, one way to do it is to put in something that's midpoint on the range, so that you can move forward. And then let's say that you interview and they offer you a job at that, and you know that you're worth more than that. And you say, thank you so much for the position. I'm very excited about the opportunity. I can't wait to get hired or to get started. But the salary seems a bit on the low side for this particular job. And they say, well, that's what you put on your application. Oh, I know I did, but that was before I learned that I was going to have 15 direct reports, and I was going to be traveling 10% of the time, and I was going to have these additional responsibilities, which were not mentioned in the job description. Based on that new information, I believe that a more appropriate salary would be in the area of, and you give that.
What if you put negotiable in there in the form?
Okay, if you're able, so he said, what if you put negotiable? If you're able to put words in there, fabulous. If it takes it and moves on, perfect. I would try to always do that. One of the things that Charles suggested, try to put, if it has to be numerals, try to put zeros. If it won't take zeros, try to put like all ones to sort of show this is a placeholder. This is something I've put in here in order to move forward, and everybody kind of understands that you're not going to work for 11111.11. Some of you may remember years ago we had sort of a volunteer. She had been a high-tech recruiter, corporate recruiter in Silicon Valley for nearly 20 years. She team taught my classes with me. She's an expert on compensation and salary negotiation. Now, she was in an enviable situation. She was also looking for a job, and she had enough money saved up. She'd made a ton of money, and she had enough saved up that she said she didn't have to work for like 2 or 3 years. She was fine. And so that gives you a great deal of leveraging power when you're, you know, she was kind of looking for a job as sort of a chess match. You know, let's try this, see if that works. And it wasn't like a life and death, I'm going to lose my home situation. But she would always put, I mean, she was a senior level high-tech corporate recruiter. And so she put a high amount in there. If there was an application where you were able to make comments, she would always say, this is the salary that I believe I am worth. I'm certainly interested in discussing, you know, negotiating other arrangements. But she would couch it in those terms. So it's up to you, kind of. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm curious about something, and maybe some of our HR experts can speak to it. When prospective employers call your references, do they ask and can
Yes. It is. There are some companies that will give that. That is public record in lots of places. And so it wouldn't be ethical for us to tell you to lie ever when it says, what was your former salary? What some people do, if they think that their former salary was low, they'll just in order to get into a conversation, they will add their benefits, they'll add the value of everything that's offered to them, which then bumps it up. And so that would be your total compensation package. And so they'll put that figure in. And then when they get into an interview, they'll say, well, that particular job, I was being paid under scale. And for the work that I did, and it was well known. It was because it was a startup, or it was because it was a nonprofit, or it was a public sector job. The figure that I gave to you is the equivalent. What I feel is the equivalent in the private sector. It's based on what people are paying for equivalent jobs, and the figure that I gave you was my total compensation package at that place. So you're honest and upfront. I've had some clients who have lied about what they made, and they got away with it, and the next salary was considerably higher based on that false information. But since it is something that employers can check, and some companies will give that out, you might want to check with your former company and just ask them, what information do you give out? There are many companies that will only give dates of employment and job title, and they will not give out salary, but other companies will give out salary. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and contractors are very often like that. Or you get a low salary and you get a big bonus, a production bonus, which changes everything. And so as long as you can support the information you give, I think that's fine. That for you to play around with those figures a little bit, and you can say, I've said 35, which is an in between. It's an average of that. Or if you want to give 50 and say, yeah, my last job paid me $50 an hour, and that's what that's what I'm worth, and that's the value of the services I provided, and I believe I'm worth that in this job as well. And then you go to some other place that they don't have those resources, and you take less. So it's kind of up to you. A good company is going to want to keep you, and I feel they're going to pay you an appropriate salary, regardless of what you made at your last job, really. If you can, in fact, that's what salary negotiation is all about. We had the very first speaker we ever had at Launchpad Job Club was somebody from AMD who talked about salary negotiation from both sides of the desk, and he talked about how AMD negotiates salaries, and he said almost always when AMD makes an offer, there's money on the table. And in order to get at that money, you have to do two things. You have to ask for it, and you have to explain why you're worth it. So have that in mind. Okay, but just be prepared, because very often in the screening interview, that the topic of salary is covered. So don't let it throw you for a loop. Be prepared in case it comes up. What are you going to say? Try to postpone it, try to defer it, try to delay it, try to get as much information as you can. And then other things to remember when you're having a phone screen, prepare an environment for this phone call. One of our people said that his grandchildren had moved in with him. He made his phone interviews from his closet. He had created a little office in there, and because it was quiet, so you want to eliminate all, your background noise, TV, music, kids, dogs, chewing, smoking. Don't be puffing on a cigarette while you're on a phone screen. Flushing, never. If you want to print out the job description and print it out big, magnified, so that you can stand up, walk around, and have this text, you can see it. You might want to do that. You've got the key points that you try to make. We had a speaker talk about phone screens years ago. She had a grid that she would create with typical questions that they would ask, and then the answers that she was going to try to give, and it had 2 or 3 different points under each one. And so she had that. Have questions prepared that you want to ask them. What about what? A mirror, lots of people, this is a tactic, a trick that telemarketers do because they want you to smile. They want you to be energized, they want you to be upbeat, they want you to smile in the phone so that you sound like one of those upbeat, positive people. That personally, that freaks me out. I can't have a mirror. I'm like, you know, it's not good for me, but it is good for lots and lots of people, and I encourage you to think about that. And then practice. We do mock interview practice down at the workforce office, and most of the people are practicing for face-to-face interviews, but we've had people practice for phone interviews. And then we ask different kinds of questions, and that's fine. Get comfortable with that process. A phone screen is difficult when you can't see the people. Sometimes phone screens are even conference calls, and you have a lot of people, and that really makes it difficult to try to keep everybody straight. You might want to, if you know you're going to have a conference call, put the names of the people on a piece of paper, and so you can keep track of what kinds of questions each one is asking. So you can this guy asks very challenging technical questions. This one is concerned with management ability. This one is concerned with cultural fit or whatever. So you might want to think about that. Take notes. If possible, and sometimes it's really difficult to take notes and answer and be aware of all this other stuff at the same time. At the very least, after the interview is over, write down every single question you can remember that they asked you, and who asked it, and who was in the room, and all of that stuff. And then follow up with the interviewer. Whether you send a real quick thank you note to the interviewer, the person who set it up. Thanks for setting all this up. I know that was difficult. I appreciate it. What's the next step? Where do we go from here? In fact, if you're able to ask that at the end of the phone screen, you should do that. But you want to keep in touch with that person. And a real quick thank you is always a good idea. Skype interviews, very quickly. Prepare the stage. Everybody understands you have to control what's happening in the background. You don't want it to be your dirty dishes in the sink. You don't want it to be the naked man that walked past somebody in an interview I heard of recently. Oh, I didn't know you were interviewing. Gosh, honey. Okay, so make sure that the background is whatever it wants to be, a blank wall, a bookshelf, something professional. Make sure that you set the stage for that. Make sure that the lighting is good. Most of us in our living rooms or wherever, in our offices, we don't have great lighting for Skype. And so make sure that if you have to bring in extra lights so that you can see. And also if you're dark complected, keep in mind that you might have to have special lighting so that your features are viewable on the other side of that screen. So keep in mind you've got to control that whole lighting piece. This is a theatrical presentation. Make sure that you have privacy. No nudity allowed. The most difficult thing for me when I try to talk on Skype is that you have your picture, you see yourself or whatever on the screen. You see the face of that person on the screen, but that's not where you should look. That makes your face go down. You need to look at the camera, and that's difficult sometimes to keep your vision focused on that camera. So I always like to cut out a picture from a magazine. I cut out a face, and I stick it up there, and I speak to that face. I have eye contact with that face that's taped up there right next to the camera, and that helps keep me from looking down. Also, when you look down all the time, then you have shadows in your face, and you don't get that. Yeah, Pat.
Yeah, I like to actually see the movements longer most times, but what I do is I'll move the Skype up to where the camera is.
Oh, are you able to do that? Yeah. Oh, I never knew that. Very interesting. Okay, good. If you're able to do that. So if you didn't hear that, she said she's able to move the Skype. She moves their actual face up as close to the camera as she can get, so she's looking right at him.
I just did this, and it only goes up so far. It doesn't go all because the camera is in the frame, right? So you
Okay.
Off, but you just have to train yourself to watch the camera.
Okay, well maybe you want to do a little cutout picture then.
Cutout picture. One analogy is that there's a difference between going for a target and seeking the target and avoiding your losses. And when people interview and they want to make eye contact with that image on the the picture, they're trying to avoid their losses. You want to see how that other person is reacting to you. But what you really need to do is focus on the camera and project your image, because that's your only best shot at that moment.
That's right. That's right. And that, I totally agree with that, that you want to, the eye contact piece is really important. Don't focus as much on the reactions. You've only got that one shot to present yourself, and you want to present yourself. You're just like Jimmy Kimmel. You're talking into the camera. And you know you're reaching other people out there whom you can't see. So focus on that and have your eye contact there. Otto?
One thing, when you do either Skype or you're doing just a normal phone interview, the way you are dressed, the way you appear, can set your psychological frame. If you're doing a phone interview in your pajamas, it's a whole lot different than if you're sitting in front of somebody with a suit on, or you're dressed up for that interview.
That's right. Even a phone interview, there are lots of people who dress professionally. There's two ways to look at it. Do you want to be comfortable? Do you do your best performance when you're wearing your sweats and you're comfortable? You've got your lucky T-shirt on. You got your house shoes. You're not in pain. You're good. No pantyhose. You're great. Okay, that's one way to look at it. But this is a professional discussion, and are you going to present yourself more effectively, whether they can see you or not, when you are dressed professionally? And lots of people like to do that. In a Skype interview, a book that I was reading said you only have to worry about waist up. I think that's dangerous. I think that's dangerous. You may forget. And you may get up to go get something, and all of a sudden. So I think the total ensemble is the way to go. All right. Skype interviews, once again, same as always. Study the job description. Prepare questions that you're going to ask them as well. Practice with a friend. Always practice before a Skype interview. Skype a friend. And so they can tell you how you come across. Can they see your face? What does your background look like? Practice, 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 so that you get other people who give you that feedback before you spring it on a potential employer. So there is that, and I think that's the end of that. The last thing we were gonna discuss was, what do you say if they say that you are overqualified? And would you pass these out too? This is an article about being overqualified that I really liked, but we had a competition some years ago in Launchpad about that overqualified question, and we everybody submitted their answer. The one that won as being the best one was somebody said, "Hire me and I'll teach you everything I know." So that was the one that won. There was also a Wizard of Id cartoon years ago where the stable hand, I don't know if you guys remember the Wizard of Id, but there was almost always a stable hand job opening. So it's the person, that shovels the horse stuff. And this guy had applied, and the interviewer said, "Well, I think you're overqualified for this position." And he said, "Hire me and I'll be as stupid as you want me to be." I don't think that answer is particularly good. One of the answers that's in this article is where the person says, when they say you're overqualified, and they say, "I agree with you. I am overqualified, but that means that I'll be able to hit the ground running. I can do this with no additional training. You're not going to have to manage me because I know this job inside and out," and so forth and so on. When I've been told you're overqualified for this job, which of course rarely happens, I always say, "In what way? In what way do you feel I'm overqualified?" Because the way they answer that gives me the information I need. So if they say, well, and see, with my situation, it's so atypical that it wouldn't happen. Like, they're never going to say, "Well, you're used to making so much money." That's not going to be there. They're never going to say, "Well, you've been a director and now this is a lead position." They're not going to say that. But sometimes they'll say, you're going to be working with people who are much younger. And so then I know, it's not that I'm overqualified, it's that I'm older. And that's your issue, and I know how to address that. And so if you can get them to specify how they feel you are overqualified, then you kind of know where to direct that, your argument, your defense of that. Who had a good answer in the little talkback session in the interview? Nobody. Ah, Rick, thank you.
Everybody can decide if it's a good answer. So the thing that I have kind of worked on is the first acknowledgement. They say, well, we think you're overqualified. I said, well, thank you for recognizing the amount of skill and experience I've got. So right away, you've kind of made it a positive thing, right? The gentleman David that I was talking with, he had a different situation. He was in sales. And apparently they said, well, we think you're overqualified. We think you have too much focus on the strategy and not the tactical. And that's kind of a different flavor of, well, you're overqualified, right? And I kind of suggested to him, well, if that happens again, you know, if you don't have a strategy, then you can't implement it. And so you have to have some kind of a roadmap and a strategy if you want to go get the target. So kind of turn it back around and say, if you're just tactical, then you can't.
That's a good one. If you don't have a roadmap, if you don't know where you're going, you don't have the vision of where you're trying to go. How are you going to know which path to take in order to get it? Yeah, I like those. I like both of those. Joe.
We came up with one: acknowledge that you're overqualified, because that's actually a good thing, and then say, why is that a problem? Yeah. Rather than go after this kind of vague, you're overqualified, give me something specific to talk to.
I love why is that a problem? Wouldn't you want to have somebody with a lot of skills and a lot of resources and a lot of ability to really make this job as successful as it can be? Yes, sir.
Mary brought up the fact that a lot of companies say that they're afraid to leave.
Always. So the comment was lots of times when they say that, they're afraid you're going to leave. And I think always when they say that, they're afraid you're going to leave, that the job's not going to be challenging enough for you, or it's not going to pay you enough and you're going to leave. And so you're going to keep looking while you're there. And and he said, which you are and you should. You should keep looking, always. If that's the case, and of course that's kind of the subtext of you are overqualified, is that you're not going to stay with us. And so you need to assure them, why you are interested in this job in the first place. You know, there's a wonderful line in that article where the guy says, if at any time I want this job, I'm interested in this job, if at any time I feel that whatever my attention is lacking, or I'm losing focus, or I don't really feel that I can devote myself to the success of this job, I will walk away from it. I'm not gonna have you hire me if I know this is not something that I'm going to stick with, or something like that. And I think that might be something that you need to reassure them of. We had, speaking of state employment, we had what was his name? Tom was his first name. He had come from a very, very senior program management position, maybe even a director, I can't remember, but he worked for Overwatch, which was a defense contractor. Everybody who worked there had to have top security clearance, and they lost a big contract with the government, and so we had a lot of Overwatch people in here. And he was 62 years old and applied for a job as a project manager with a state agency. And he sent a letter along with his application explaining why the money was okay. You can imagine a senior level position with a defense contractor, how much money he made after having worked there for a long time. And so he sent a letter along with it saying, I understand what this job pays, I'm totally okay with that, and I don't need to make that kind of money that I'd made in the past. And he interviewed, and they really, really liked him. And the state generally, as I said, asks the same questions of everybody. They did take him aside and ask him two things that were unique to him. And one was, again, about the money. You understand what this pays. Well, he's 62 years old. He's good. You know, he's made a ton of money. He's got tons in the bank. He doesn't need a lot. And he made that clear. And he said, this is really a job that I'm very interested in. And they said, some of these projects are going to last probably for 2-3 years. We don't want to hire somebody that intends to be moving on right away. We need somebody with a certain level of commitment to seeing this through. And he said, I intend to work at least 5 more years. And I think that was fair. They always say that, you know, where do you see yourself in 3 years or 5 years, that can be an age discrimination question, but I think it's a fair question for a company to ask. If you know you're not going to be here, and these projects require some amount of training or investment of time and energy, we need to know that. So anyway, they hired him, and he said one of the reasons he really wanted that was that he said, last year I spent something like 6 or 8 months, 7 months in either Iraq or Afghanistan, and he said my wife never knew if I was coming home. I was, always wearing a flak jacket, and he said I'd like to go home at 5 o'clock and have a life, and not have to worry about being killed. So this job is perfect, a state job.